I'm doing great things. Dap my partner up, I'm glad he on the same thing. Bills is going up, but I know how to maintain. Had to cut him off, but I ain't got to say name. Nah, hey, plans of being the boss and I ain't gang bang. Some of my brothers did, but we be on the same thing. Solid sense of kid, respect is just the main thing. If I said it, I'm gon' do it. I ain't changed. Hey, I'm from the west side.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the I Am Courtney Chandler podcast. We discover ourselves, we embrace it, and of course, we unlock the potential within. Of course, I'm your host, Courtney Chandler, and I want to thank you for every time you're watching this show or listening to this show, whatever day, month, year, whenever you're listening to this show and watching. I appreciate you. Of course, if you're watching on YouTube at I Am Courtney Chandler podcast. And if you're listening on Spotify and on Apple Podcasts. Hey, thank you so much again. And of course, make sure you follow on social media. I am Courtney Chandler Podcast on Facebook and on Instagram. Of course, like always, we start off the show with Shine a Light, but we shine a light on a person or a group of people who are doing great things in the community. Hey, and at this time, you are about to experience Shine a Light.
The history, the culture, and the sound. Historical black colleges and universities serve as institutions of knowledge and service to the black community. They have produced some of the world's greatest scientists, politicians, recording artists, filmmakers, actors, and athletes. This week, the I Am Courtney Chandler podcast celebrates and shines a light on all 107 HBCUs and the 200,000 plus students who are currently enrolled at one of the higher education institutions. We love you for giving us a space to be creative and to be proud of who we are. We thank you for allowing us to be ourselves and appreciate you for everything you have done to make communities better across the globe. In fact, without HBCUs, there wouldn't be a Courtney Chandler. So, thank you.
Shout out to all the HBCUs out there. If you're in Birmingham during this week that this podcast has been recorded, of course, you know this week is the Magic City Classic, Alabama A&M versus Alabama State University. Uh, as you saw at the end, that's my dad and that's my mom, both graduates of Alabama A&M University. And right now, I currently have a sister who is currently attending Tennessee State University, Gabby Chandler, who's right now currently at Tennessee State. She was here this week and now she's back in school. So my family is full of HBCU grads, and also we have people currently in HBCUs. So I just had to show some love to shine a light to our HBCUs out there. And of course, shout out to Alabama A&M, Alabama State, Magic City Classic this weekend, or more like this week. It's a week long celebration, everybody. If you're from Birmingham, you know what the deal is. If you're not, I'll explain to you on the episode. But yeah, happy Magic City Classic week. Hope everybody having fun and hope everybody stays safe out there as well. Hey, so let's jump into the episode. This week, we're talking to specifically the people who have something and they are asking. This week, I want to talk to you specifically on about asking. So this week's episode is I am asking. So go ahead and write this down. Go ahead and tell your friend I am asking. And this would be simply whatever you're asking for, whatever you're trying to accomplish. But this week we're going to focus on I am asking. And I want to first start off telling a story. It's a story in the Bible about a woman named, yeah, I'm trying to get my breath in because I don't know. I've been seeming parched lately. I got this water here, so I probably need to take a swig of it. I'll probably take a swig of it in a minute. But it's a woman in the Bible by the name of Hannah, and Hannah, she was married to. You go to the Bible, you will see in First Samuel, she was married to a man by the name of hold on, I want to make sure I get the name right. Now, in fact, I'll just go ahead and read it for you. So, in First Samuel, chapter 1, and starting the first verse, it said there was a certain man from um, Rehaman, a Zethite from the hill country of Ephraim, whose name was Elka Elkaman, son of Jeroam, the son of Elihu, the son of Tuhum, and the son of Zeph, and Ephraimite. He had two wives. One was called Hannah. That's the person we're focused on, and the other was called Paniah. So I can. Sorry, I got tied tongue, lost my train of thought. They were trying to mess with me on tonight. So that's why I kind of want to focus the stories on. So Hannah and Paniah, they were this man's two wives, and Paniah, she was able to have children, but Hannah was barren. She was barren and she could not have children, and that's the one thing that she wanted to give her husband, but she wanted to always give her husband children. So of course, Paniah being the one that was able to have the children, she in the Bible says she irritated Hannah because Hannah couldn't have children, so she would pick on her, she would irritate her to the point where when you read in verse 10, and this is what the verse that I want to really focus on here, and it says, "In her deep anguish, Hannah prayed to the Lord, weeping bitterly, and she made a vow, saying, Lord Almighty, if you will only look on your servant's misery and remember me and not forget your servant, but give her a son, then I will give him to the Lord for all the days of his life, and no razor will ever be used on his head." So after she prayed that prayer, the prophet Eli heard her. He thought something was going on with her, and she explained to her, "No, like this is my prayer." And he immediately told her, "Go away, Lord is going to answer that prayer." And Hannah ended up having a son, and that son's name was Samuel. And of course, we know Samuel was a great prophet in the Bible during the day of David. He was actually the one to anoint David as king, also anointed Saul as king as well before David. And the prayer that she prayed, she that was the one thing that she always wanted. She wanted a child, and she prayed to God, and God answered her prayer. So I want to first off start off asking the question before we get into the depths of what we're talking about this evening. Forgive me as I got for the Bible scholars, I got the names wrong. Forgive me, if you know Bible, if you know it, this charge to my head, not my heart, because I read Bible and I sometimes have to listen to I have to listen because the names in the Bible are very difficult to say. So please forgive me, but I did want to get some background of where we're going with this episode on Hannah and her prayer of having a son whose name was Samuel, and Paniah who had children but irritated her. But finally Hannah was able to have children. So first thing I want to start off with is, what are you asking for? So what are you asking for? Are you asking for a better job? You asking for a car? You asking for a house? Are you asking for marriage? What are you asking for right now in your life, in this season of your life? What are you asking God for um, in this season? What are you trying to get? What you want to accomplish? And the next thing I want to point out to you is there's nothing wrong with asking for things. Um, there's nothing wrong with wanting better for yourself. So always want be willing to want to ask, God for certain things in your life. There's nothing wrong with, wanting a better house, nothing wrong with wanting a better car. In fact, it's scripture that backs it up. It's certain scriptures that back up asking God for certain things. In fact, Mark 11:24 says, "Therefore I tell you, whatever you ask for in prayer, believe you have received it, and it will be yours. Then Matthew 7:7 says, ask and it will be given to you. This is one of my favorite verses. Seek and you will find. Knock and the door will be open to you. And then John 14:14 says, you may ask for anything in my name and I will do it. So Jesus makes it plain to us that there's nothing wrong with asking because he will do what we ask for. He will give us what we ask for. So there's nothing wrong with asking. In fact, when I was growing up, my dad would always tell me, uh, I would be afraid to ask for certain things that he was like, "Why you didn't like?" Is it was something I wanted. He's like, "Why you didn't ask for it?" He was like, the worst thing somebody can tell you is no. So he's like, "There's nothing wrong with asking." He was like, "The worst thing I can tell you is no." He always tell me, closed mouth don't get fed. So express the same thing to you. Closed mouth don't get fed. If you want something, ask for it because there's nothing wrong with asking for it. And Jesus said, if we ask for it, we shall receive it. And if we knock, the door will be open. So there's nothing wrong with asking. Now, this is the part where I really want to kind of tune in and focus on as far as this episode of I am asking. And it's when we ask for something from God, what vow do we make with God? As you saw in the passage there with Hannah, she made a vow that if she had a child, she would give it back to God. And that's immediately what she did. She gave her son. I didn't go into more of the story, but she immediately gave her son when he came of age, or he came a certain length of time. She gave her son back to the priest Eli, and he stayed in the temple and learned from Eli in the temple. So she made good on her vow to God when she asked for a child. And a lot of times I think this is sometimes maybe the deal breaker is we ask for certain things and we don't put a vow on it. So it's basically like when you are a kid and you ask for something, and maybe when you ask for something, your parents might, or I know my parents is like, okay, I want a new game. Well, my mom or my dad would be like, all right, you got to make good grades. If you make good grades, then you get the new game, or you get to go out to eat, and so and so. That's the vow. But you don't, then you lose it. Or another vow is let's reverse it. You know, I promise to do good in school, and if I promise to do good in school, then I don't lose my Xbox. Or as I promise to do good in school, then I get to hang out with my friends on the weekends. I get to go to the movies. I get to, go to the sporting event. I get to go to WWE. Is I do good, but if I don't do good, if I don't do what I'm supposed to do, then I broke the vow. And so that means I don't get the reward because I broke the vow from what was already set in the agreement beforehand. So if God gives you this, you have to promise that you are going to do what you say you're going to do. In the passage when we talked about this at the beginning, Hannah promised that if she had a child, she would give it back to God. If she made good on her promise, on her vow to God. So, what is the vow that you're going to give to God if you're asking for something? So, let's say you're asking for a house. Are you going once you get the house, are you going to bless the house? Are you going to have somebody come and bless the house and give it back to God? That says you get the new job. Are you going to give God 10% of your tithes? Let's say you you get a new opportunity. Are you going to give God, the glory, making sure his name is great in every opportunity you receive? These are simple vows that God, asks of us. So what vow are you making to God with your ask? A lot of us ask for things, but we don't put a vow on the ask that we have, or we don't put a vow on our ask. So what are the things you're asking for? And also, what is the vow that you're attaching with that ask? So that leads to the last point. It's making good on the vow and the promise. So have we made good on the promises? we have previously made. So let's think about it. You're asking for something from God right now, and then you put a vow on it. But this maybe go back in your mind to thinking of the last time you asked God for something and be honest with yourself. The last time you asked God for something, you put a vow on it. Did you make good on the vow? I want you to really think about it. And we're all guilty of it. Did you make good on the vow that you told God that you were going to do if you got what you that you if you got what you asked for? And a lot of times we forget about our vows. We forget about the promise we made to God. And when we do that, it makes us untrustworthy. So we go to God and we ask God, "Hey God, can I have this?" And I'm going to make a vow to this, but then God remembers, "Hey, I remember you asked for this years ago and you vowed and you made a promise that you would do this if I gave you this, but you didn't make good on the promise." So then God goes around and is like, "Why should I give you what you asked for if you don't make good on the vow that you originally said?" And a lot of times we go back and, we have to think about those things, or we have to really hone in on why didn't we stick to our vow when we got our ask. So I want to continue to use, just analogies. If we, ask to be married and, we get married and our vow is to, put God first in our marriage, but instead in the marriage, or even it can be a relationship, we don't even take time to, bless our food. We don't even take time to, read our word once a day, or spend time, going to Bible study, going to church. We forget about the simple vows that we made from our ask. So it's important to ask, but it's also important to stick true to the vow that you gave to God. So in keeping your vow and promise to God, it's important. It's an important part of the asking. You have to stick to the vow because number one, when we make a vow to God, and when we ask and make our vow, it gives God glory. Whatever we do, we give God the glory because without Him, none of these things would be able to come to pass. And number two, it shows Him that we appreciate Him. When we ask and we say, give our vows and say, God, if you give me this, I'm going to do this. It shows not only that we appreciate him, but this is the last point, but it makes us trustworthy. It makes us a trustworthy person when we ask and we give a vow and then we receive and then we get what we ask for and then we stay true to that vow. It makes us a trustworthy person in the eye of God. So that makes it easier for us to go to God in prayer for even more things because God knows, hey, Courtney, when I gave it to him, he made that vow and he stayed true to that. So I'm gonna give him what he asked for because I know he stayed and the vow he made, it was a good vow and he held true to his word. He was a man of his word. So are you going to be a man or woman of your word if you ask for something, receive it, and you stick to the vow that you made to God in order to give him the glory and then show you appreciating him and show you appreciate him, but then thirdly, show that you're trustworthy with what he's giving you and the vow you made to him. So, number one, ask. Nothing wrong with asking. Nothing wrong with asking God for something. Nothing wrong wanting something and asking God for it. Scripture says there's nothing wrong with that. Number two is when we ask, what vow are we willing to make to God? What vow, what promise are we willing to make to God? And then number three to this episode is making good on the vow and the promise because it gives God glory, it shows we appreciate Him, and then third, it makes us trustworthy. So I want you to ask, I want you to make a vow, and I want you to make good on the vow and the promise you made to God in your ask. Hey, I'm so thankful you all or were able to come on this episode. There's no word of the week because I think asking is our literally our word of the week this week because when we ask, we receive, but also we have to make a vow to it and we have to stand firm in the vow that we make. So this episode is I am asking, and of course the word of the week is also I am asking or asking. So I want you to just keep in mind those things. It's good to ask, but what vow are you willing to make to God in your ask and standing firm on the vow once you receive the ask you got from God? Because number one, I'm going to say it one more time, it gives God the glory, shows you appreciate Him. And then third, it makes you trustworthy. Hey, this is another episode of the I Am Courtney Chandler podcast. Listen, I want to thank you all so much for taking out the time to listen and watch, of course, on YouTube. Of course, you can always listen on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and also you can listen on YouTube as well. It's a habit. So yes, make sure you watch on YouTube and listen on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and of course, make sure that you follow on um, Instagram, I am Courtney Chandler Podcast. And then also make sure you follow on Facebook, I am Courtney Chandler Podcast. You know what my ask is? I'm gonna tell you. My ask is that this episode and the episodes that so far have been recorded and are already up, my ask from God right now is that it will reach more people and it will prick more hearts that that these episodes will encourage people to continue to discover themselves, embrace it, and unlock the potential within. And also, my ask is that this podcast will grow to leaps and bounds that I can't even see. And you know what my vow is? To give God the glory in every step of the way and to always recognize and acknowledge Him and not forget how I started but not and also not forget how I got to where I am. So always putting him number one in this podcast. No matter what I do, he will be number one. He will be glorified in this podcast. That is my vow. So what is your vow? Hey, this is another episode of the I Am Courtney Chandler podcast. Listen, I want to thank you all so much again. Make sure you take and listen to the other episodes and this one that's happening right now. I am asking. I'll talk to y'all real soon. Until then, God bless y'all, love y'all, and continue to embrace yourself. I almost messed it up, y'all. And continue to discover yourself, embrace it, and unlock the potential within. I have a mess up every now and then. So continue to discover yourself, embrace it, and unlock the potential within. I'll see y'all soon. God bless you. Love you. This is another episode of the I Am Courtney Chandler podcast.